What is your favorite unsolved scientific mystery? Story 1. Okay, well, this is not as serious as some of the others on here, but the Devil's Kettle Falls. It's a waterfall that splits in two in Minnesota. One half goes to Lake Superior, but the other half just disappears down a hole. And no one knows how deep it is or where it goes. People have dropped dyes, ping pong balls, etc. down the hole and checked surrounding lakes and rivers, but nothing ever turns up. It drives me crazy. Story 2, along the same lines, a large assortment of molecules have left and right-handed versions, but the vast majority of the molecules involved in biological processes are of one-handedness. I want to say left, but I'm not a chemist or biologist, so I don't remember for sure. Why did life on Earth evolve in that way? Along the same lines, a large assortment of molecules have left and right-handed versions, but the vast majority of the molecules involved in biological processes are of one-handedness. I want to say left, but I'm not a chemist or biologist, so I don't remember for sure. Why did life on Earth evolve in that way? There may well be no other reason than the simple fact that the organisms that survived and propagated used them, if indeed any organisms ever existed that used the opposite orientation. Sure, there may be a benefit one way or the other, but I haven't the foggiest idea how we'd test that. In the end, much like the genetic code itself, it is likely an accident frozen in time. Story 3. I'm doing my PhD in radio astronomy right now. A few years ago, a radio telescope in Australia named Park saw a sudden millisecond duration burst from a region of the sky it was coming from that was insanely bright, like brightest thing observed bright, and never repeated again, and was unlike anything observed before. It was also from incredibly far away, like far, far, outside the galaxy, far away. And no one had the first clue as to what could be creating such a signal. Then, for fun and science, no one observed another one for years at parks or at any other observatory. People started to suggest instrumentation was to blame, or perhaps an odd weather phenomenon. But then Parks saw a second burst, at which point they were named fast radio bursts, or FRBs, and then a few others. In fact, they saw 6 of these, but radio astronomers around the world were still nervous because no one else had seen them. Well, don't worry, boys and girls of Reddit, because it appears that an FRB was detected at Arecibo. There are these giant, quick bursts of radiation that randomly occur all around the sky, don't seem to be from the galaxy, and no one has a clue what creates them. This is the biggest revolution in radio astronomy since the discovery of pulsars. And this is why science is awesome. Just when you think you have it all solved, a random burst of radiation reminds you how much there still is to discover. Story 4. I'm a geologist. This is maybe not nature's greatest unanswered question, which probably lies in the fields of physics or biology. But my vote goes to the question of when and how plate tectonics initiated on Earth. I've seen some interesting models, especially in relation to whether plate tectonics could occur on other planets, such as super Earths, but there's no real consensus on an answer. Story 5. WOW signal. In 2012, on the 35th anniversary of the WOW signal, Arecibo Observatory beamed a response from humanity, containing 10,000 Twitter messages, in the direction from which the signal originated. In the response, Arecibo scientists have attempted to increase the chances of intelligent life receiving and decoding the celebrity videos and crowdsourced tweets by attaching a repeating sequence header to each message that will let the recipient know that the messages are intentional and from another intelligent life form. We sent back a message with videos of celebrities and tweets. Yeah, we are so boned. Story 6, protein folding. When peptide chains are created, there are a million ways to be folded into a 3 days protein structure, but somehow the body finds a way to fold efficiently. Not always 100% correct, but much better than computational efficiency. Protein folding is driven primarily by hydrophobic interaction. Just Google hydrophobic effect. It should help explain why they fold the way they do. Base pairing and stacking all driven to fold under hydrophobic properties. Mostly. Story 7. How is it that light acts as both a wave and a particle? As far as I know, this is still being researched. Not a physicist or anything like that, just an engineering grad. But if I remember correctly, it isn't that light behaves as both a wave and a particle. All quantum particles, not their official name, behave like that. And it happens to be akin to waves or particles of the atomic and macroscopic level. I guess what I'm trying to say is that light doesn't behave both as a wave and a particle. Light behaves like light, and the models we have for waves and particles intersect with its behavior in some points. Story 8, gravity is my favorite. We've known about it long before many of these other forces or mysteries, but to this day, we don't know why it does what it does. Objects with mass attract each other with a force determined by factors directly tied to how much mass each object has and how far apart they are. This is observation of the event, and we have no idea what causes gravity to pull things together. Strangely, it even has an effect on massless particles in time. Not understanding it is one of the big barriers to a grand unifying theory. Will the discovery of the Higgs boson shed light on it? Or do we need to find something even more exotic? Story 9, the specific experiments elude me right now. But there's a scientific principle wherein a given experiment will yield exactly the same results an apparently infinite number of times, except when those results are observed. Then it changes. It's more of an observation than a mystery, though. Let's take the example of rolling a ball through a dark room. When you roll the ball and measure the angle at which it enters, it exits the room at a particular location. Makes sense. However, in actual science, this is much like a photon leaving a light bulb and later colliding with a sensor. Since we are studying the nature of particles, we need to know not just where the thing ends up, but how it got there. So let's go back to rolling a ball through a dark room. I control the angle and velocity of the ball entering the dark room, but to scientifically prove that the ball has traveled along the implied path, I need to monitor it. Given the situation, how do you do it? In order to determine where the ball is, I go and get more balls. Let's say the main ball is a basketball, and I get a bunch of golf balls. I roll the basketball, and then, to determine exactly where the basketball is at a given time, I roll 3 golf balls at it. The 3 golf balls bounce off, and I look at where they exit. I can reverse their trajectories and determine with moderate accuracy where the basketball was at the moment. Much to my surprise, though, in observing the basketball, it has now come out at a different location than when I tested it before, without observation. What gives? Story 10, I'm starting grad school in literature so I can study cognitive narratology. I'm incredibly intrigued by how mental illness or other differences in cognitive function affect the way stories or memories are related to others, particularly in literature. My specific focus is on the satirical tradition, comparing the French Renaissance writing of Rabelais to the Restoration/18th century writings of Lawrence Stern and Jonathan Swift, and then finally to postmodernists such as David Foster Wallace and Thomas Pynchon. I am interested in seeing how these narratives reflect cognitive development and evolution, and what that might say about human consciousness and our desire to understand it. Story 11, Abiogenesis, the origin of life, has no standard model at this time. There are some decent theories, but it seems like the kind of question that's going to stay vague for a long while. And then we're going to get a major breakthrough all of a sudden, whether that be from a more elaborate Urey Miller experiment or discovery of life outside of and unrelated to Earth life, or maybe something else entirely. Maybe several of the theories of how life can arise are valid, and which one actually happens at a given location comes down to which set of conditions arise first, or just blind randomness. Story 12, Premonitions. Everybody has had one or two. How the heck is the mind able to see into the future? The human mind is amazing. It can and must predict everything one will do before their body can carry out that action. When one picks up a glass of water, their mind already has calculated its mass and several other forces acting on it, and thus can predict the exact movements needed to lift it in the manner one desires. Premonitions could possibly be an extension of this. One's subconscious has gathered enough information from sources that their conscious did not necessarily notice, and displays this information to the conscious in a manner that the conscious may use to make decisions. Story 13, Bicycles. While we know the basics of the bicycle, leverage, gears, brakes, etc., we still don't have a reason why we can balance on a bicycle. Or, more specifically, why it's easier to stay balanced while moving than just sitting there. There was a theory that it could be explained the same way that a top stays spinning, but bikes don't have rotational momentum in the same way. There's also been some pseudoscience BS about how balance is actually the sixth sense or something like that. Still no idea. Story 14, Instinct. That process inside of us that tells us to blink, breathe and exhale, eat, drink, mate, etc., etc., in both our species and others. How the hell did something so powerful just come to exist in our own bodies? We're ingrained from birth with it, as are other animals, and we'd probably die without it. And yet there it stands, this mystery process that regulates what we do without us ever telling it to do anything. Story 15, not really unsolved science, but only a tiny fraction of our ocean is explored. Less than 10% has been researched and scientifically looked at. Imagine what amazing, crazy, bizarre, and just mind boggling things are out there. When you look at things like the Julie Sound, the Big Bloop, the Abyss, Mariana's Trench, the open ocean, and just the sheer vastness of the Earth's oceans and how huge they are, 70% of Earth's entire surface huge, and all sorts of other ocean phenomena, there is so much to learn and discover. Just thinking about what remains to be discovered out there is awesome and also kind of scary to think about. Story 16, there is yet to be a spot in the brain identified that controls the consciousness. We have made huge leaps into the field of our own mind in recent years, from identifying where in the brain controls instinctive reactions to where dreams physically occur in our heads. It has gotten to the point where it seems that there is a physical place in our brain for every little thing that it does, except for one thing: the consciousness, that voice inside your head that narrates every thought. If all other functions of the brain have a physical place where they occur, why doesn't this? Is the burden shared between the neurons to unite the brain? Is it just that consciousness isn't part of the brain? If the latter is true, what controls it then? Some kind of soul that isn't tied to any physical part of the body? Really, we just have no idea. Story 17, the fundamental forces, particularly gravity and electromagnetism. Yeah, masses attract. The forces relative to the distance squared. We know the gravitational constant. We have tons of information about orbital mechanics and everything to do with gravity. We know all kinds of magnets and electricity too, like charges repel and opposites attract. But why? Why do masses attract? Why do opposite magnetic forces attract? Nobody knows. It just happens. Deal with it. Story 18, I'm not saying there's a god or anything, but what the crap guides or causes RNA to replicate and become something else? How do things at the cellular level know how to do what they do? It's crazy to think that we have all these models and explanations of what happens, but there's no theory really of how it is all happening. Like, seriously, how and why do things do what they do beyond just an explanation of what they do? I would like to know how it is they're doing it. Story 19. For me, stuttering is one of the greatest mysteries I know. Scientists have not found a gene for stuttering, yet I know some who stutter. Her dad and granddad stutter, and 5 children all stutter. I stutter because there is no one in my family who has stuttered. The crazy thing is that I don't stutter when I sing it when I speak in unison with others. I have a tape recorder in front of me. I don't stutter, but as soon as I press rec, something triggers in my brain and I suddenly stutter severely. All in all, it's a mystery what stuttering really is. Is it purely psychological, or is there something in my body malfunctioning? There was a research years ago claiming stutters had a lack of zinc in their body, but it turned out only to be true for some stutters. Story 20, I once read about 2 brothers who were riding horses, not too far from their farm where they lived. They came across a hole in the ground, a huge hole. If I remember right, it was 2 feet deep with a 75 feet diameter. Also, it was perfectly cut. It could be described like how a cookie cutter would cut. Amazingly, they found a chunk of land 1 mile away from the hole. They couldn't figure out how this happened, nor could the geologists that came to observe it. There were no tracks or signs of vehicles and machinery. If I can find my book, I could probably give names and a location where this happened. Story 21, does Stonehenge classify as scientific? Because if so, that's my answer. I understand how it was conceived and all. Patterns in the sky were observed, and an observatory or calendar was devised. But who built it? How? They didn't have modern construction equipment, so how did they get stones to stack up on top of each other when it meant manipulating several tons of rock? Was it abandoned before completion, or was some of it destroyed or reclaimed for other projects? It just doesn't make sense, but I refuse to believe that aliens made it. Story 22. Why are humans seemingly unique in their drive of curiosity? What makes them more capable than lizards? To invent an automobile or to contemplate the wonders of life? Oh, I've heard it explained away as being our superior brains, but it's got to be more than that. Humans are destructive to the natural environment. They are similar to a widespread disease. At what point and to what purpose did we overcome the legacies of our primal ancestors to become rocket-building megalomaniacs? Story 23. My favorite thing to think about it is time itself, if it exists. And if it does exist, then well. It's basically the ultimate mover question, I guess. How can I exist at all if time is infinite? It makes me think that time in itself, how we perceive reality, and our universe for that matter, is not significant entity or reality. Either that is true or there are still some major things we need to figure out about our reality. Hopefully, the answer will align with the Occam's razor principle and make some kind of sense. What sucks is I think the true reality, if there is such a thing, will make as much sense to us as nuclear physics makes to an ant. Story 24, there's a spectra that we get when we point our spectrometers into clouds of interstellar gas. We subtract from it a similar star's spectrum, so that we know we are only looking at the spectrum associated with the absorption of the gas cloud. Over 250 lines have been identified, I believe, and so far we've managed to assign 0 of them to specific compounds. We have tried almost every chemical that we know the IR and UV and vis of. We're almost certain that the chemicals will be organic in nature, as they have permanent dipoles. Could be an indication that space chemistry is vastly different in terms of bonding principle to the chemistry that we observe on the Earth's surface and under one standard atmosphere of pressure. Story 24, it's a dull question and stupid vague. But why is anything? Seriously, why do the things we have work like they do? Why is it that protons and neutrons ball up in these little clumps? And for that matter, why do protons or neutrons or really anything even exist at all? Why is there this phantom force that binds tiny motes of dust that are our stars into galaxies? Why is the sky so scattered? Why is anything here different from everywhere else? Put simply, why is anything? We like to act smart, we like to act like we know everything because we can explain everything. But even our best can only break things down so far. First, it was objects, then molecules and atoms, and then protons, electrons, and neutrons. And now we are reaching down into the subatomic, the quarks. But how deep is the rabbit hole? Even when we break out bits down to the very bottom, what then? Can we explain everything? Is there an unknowable nature of the universe that makes it be? Story 25. I've had this question I've been asking professors for about 5 years now, and none have been able to answer it. It has to do with quantum field theory, specifically virtual particle and antiparticle annihilation. Note, photons have momentum, even though they have no mass. Let's break this up into something akin to comic strip panels. The rule is that the first and last panels must have the same net momentum and energy, including mass, also known as rest energy. So here's the scenario. Panel 1. There's a particle, regular and ordinary in every way. We'll say an electron henceforth. Panel 2. Nearby, an electron-positron virtual pair erupts from the void. Panel 3. Normally, these virtual particles would travel with equal and opposite momentums, for a short, very, very short amount of time, then touch each other and annihilate. Most annihilation emits photons in order to satisfy conservation of energy and momentum. Virtual particles are different, however, since they are thought to exist on energy borrowed from the universe, and did not change to the net momentum of the universe because they had equal and opposite momenta. When they annihilate, they simply vanish, supposedly returning the borrowed energy back to the universe. Panel 3. Alternate. But what if our annihilates with our original, which isn't a virtual particle? Mathematically, there is no distinction between real and virtual particles. We just call them virtual because they generally don't exist long enough to interact with anything. But what if they did? Story 26. The loudest noise ever recorded on Earth by a human only happened a few years back. It matches the audio footprint of a living creature. The living creature would have to be several times larger than the largest animal currently on Earth, the blue whale. What was it? Some have said, maybe it's ice breaking off one of the poles. It could have been, but I'm not sure. How could we let the potential discovery of one of the largest and most mysterious animals slip through our fingers? They have recently found out that there is another large ocean in the crust of the Earth. Organisms can live in extreme environments underwater, like near volcanic vents. How can people be so arrogant to assume that we have discovered everything? Story 27. So let us assume the Big Bang created our universe. What came before the Big Bang? What came before the Big Bang? Our universe is expanding. And so what is outside of it? Okay, so you believe that there are many universes existing. Now go outside all that, all the way back. What created all these coexisting universes? What created that? What created that which created that? Fact. We don't know crap. We will never know crap. The most advanced civilization in existence may know everything about the order of things in this universe or perhaps even others. But the fact remains. We could possess the ability to travel time and space, and we would still know nothing. No matter how much we learn or think we know, the amount of knowledge left to learn will always be infinitesimal. We will never know what is going on here. Our minds could never even comprehend it.